Welcome to the Normal to Nomad podcast, where we share stories, thoughts, ideas, and conversations on our journey to find balance with nature in a technologically advanced world. My name is Baron.
And I'm Elsa. We live together in a 13-foot scamp trailer with our dog camp in the American wilderness.
Welcome back to the Normal to Nomad podcast. Today we're talking about our mindfulness and flow state practices and why we think those are important in everyday life. To start out, let's dive into why. Because before I really meditated or journaled or did any yoga or whatever, I always thought it was kind of woo-woo, and I didn't realize the practicality of it at all.
It's that rocket analogy. Being in the city.
It's like your brain's a bottle rocket with no fins or control over where the motor is pointing. You're just like zoom in to keep up and zoom in to make money and do all the things that we're supposed to do in our society.
Or that's how we felt.
Right. And now, it sometimes even feels now like we're strapped to a rocket with YouTube and different things.
Yeah, again, just trying to keep up.
Right, but now that we have taken the time to slow down and know how to slow down, we can effectively drive the rocket and choose which planet we're heading out to, rather than just like dumping fuel and ending up in deep space.
And it kind of seems like the mindfulness practices help us guide that rocket.
Totally.
Whereas before it would be zoom with no direction,
It was just like, where do we get fuel? Just keep dumping fuel in, because here we go.
Right.
Now, though, even I feel like with living in the scamp and doing it nomadically, it's almost like we're more on a boat than we are a rocket, because everything is slower. And we have more time, and we can choose where we want to go a lot more directly. And without mindfulness practices, it'd be like we were just on a raft, like just doing it castaway style with a wooden raft and just bonking around in the ocean, just totally at the whim of the current and the wind. But like learning how to meditate and journal and like find your deep purpose and internal direction, you can leverage those similar to like a sail or a rudder to move with the current. So I don't think, and maybe if you're like mega zen or a monk or however you choose to quantify that, you could have absolute agency over your thoughts where there's no wandering, no meandering, no nothing. But like where I'm at currently, my mind will still wander. And if I catch my mind pushing into a place that isn't useful or is regurgitative or toxic, I can sort of bend the sail and direct my mind back to whatever it is that I deem useful or like bring it back to a good place. It's not like you can just like turn the wind off, but you can bend with the wind or like leverage it.
I think having these practices back in my city life, as I was on that rocket, it's like almost imperative that you have mindfulness practices and know how to slow down and redirect, because you are going so fast. I think it could have helped me so much if I had learned these things sooner, but I mean, it's like an evolution and part of life and developing those skills. Because in the city, we got into yoga a little bit through one of our good friends, Allie, who's a teacher.
But all that was later, you know? Like when we were living in our apartment and stuff, I feel like we weren't. The only way that I could really pull my mind away from...
But what do you mean later?
Like when we were living in our apartment and stuff, the only way that I could like slow down my mind or like bring it off of work and just general problems and all these different things was to play video games or go climbing.
So then if you're going back that far, then I guess I would say my mindfulness practices at that time were getting into flow states through video editing, or that was my initial getting into makeup kind of phase of life.
Because I think with mindfulness, kind of what we've landed on is that flow states or getting into flow states is sort of the first step. Because that's a way that you can not be just rambling thoughts all the time.
And I think everybody gets into their flow state in one way or another and may not even realize it. You can get into your flow state even as you're doing office tasks, monotonous, like getting into your flow state is kind of what that means is you lose track of time, you lose a sense of all thoughts, you're just kind of lost in the moment doing whatever it is that you're doing.
It's really presence. Like you're present in whatever you're doing.
As a kid, I guess I would get into my flow state through soccer or any sports that I was doing, or art, or some people get into their flow state as they're cooking dinner. I think even watching TV is a way that people get into their flow. It's almost like that's an escape, like taking you out of your mental grind and that constant flow of thoughts. Now I really value the times that I can get into flow states as I'm drawing or doing anything creative, really. That type of a flow state is just as powerful to me as sitting in meditation for an hour.
Yeah, like recently it's been beading.
Beading or crafting, or this winter it was crocheting. Just a place to put my mind so that I'm not thinking.
And for me, the thing that I've always gone to is video games, because it like completely wraps up my mind, and then my like conscious mind is completely on whatever task that I'm doing.
So then how do you take those type of flow states and use them in kind of a productive way? Not that the video games weren't productive, because you've learned a lot from those video games, but how then for somebody, like for our old selves as we were in that really busy place, getting into our flow states in those kind of unintentional ways, how do you then start to do that with more intention?
I think it just depends on what you're trying to do, because now I felt recently, I don't know, like a few months ago, I was writing and it was late at night, and I was in the similar mental state that I would be if I were in like a super intense video game, like just cranking on writing, and that was like as stimulating as any video game has ever been. And that was really exciting for me, because then it's like, oh, I can do that here too. But I would also like to have I would like to draw more and stuff, I think that'd be really good for my mind. But it's hard for me to get there, because there's like a certain skill set that you need within whatever task that you're doing to be able to do it sort of unconsciously. But in being unconscious, then it's the most conscious. When I was the most distracted, like with high school and then with college and everything that comes with that, with relationships and people and just not knowing what in the world to do with anything, the only way that I could really pull myself into the moment was with paintball, because it was such a engaging and oftentimes painful and highly tactical sport. Paintball sort of induced presence for me, or like brought me into the moment, and then I could pull my mind away from all the things that I would generally dwell on. So that was like the first like mechanism that I found to finding presence. And it had to be like that violently ripping to pull me into the moment, because I had so many different things going on in my mind. So I played paintball for a long time, and it was like a release for me. Like I needed it because it's an exciting and like relatively violent sport, and I was in such a place that I needed that like just to like let all the warrior out, because I was so bottled up all the time. And then from there I started to get into climbing, and climbing's really interesting because it's kind of a bridge between those worlds. Like two different people could climb the same route, and one person could go at it in a really like belligerent like violent way and just like tug through it and like really make it a battle, and somebody else could super gracefully like dance through the same problem and come to the same solution. So climbing taught me also how to use my breath as a manual transmission for the mind and for the body. So like if you want to charge yourself up and like hyperoxygenate yourself to go through something difficult, or like pull through a hard problem, you can do that. And if you need to like calm down and like slow the breath, and like slow your heart rate down, you can do that. And each has its own sort of utility. So in climbing, when I first started, everything was kind of a battle. Like I climbed kind of like I paintballed, just like bounding through things and just like charging myself up and letting all that energy. But over time, I realized that a more static style of climbing also had its utility, because I was sort of more dynamic from the start. Meaning like more explosive. Like that more explosive sort of energy comes easier to me in the physical sense than like a slow, controlled, sort of methodical energy. So that's kind of through that. That's where I learned the utility of yoga, right? And like being able to be flexible and slow down and find that like balance between things and be able to be a more static climber rather than bounding through all the things and just trying to like power through it. In yoga too, I could use the same sort of breathing patterns as climbing.
I just feel like yoga didn't start as mindfulness. Yoga was workout. It felt like it was, let's strengthen our body in the ways that we need for climbing. And it came far down the road with yoga that the mental, mind, body, breath, how powerful that was in connection with one another.
Mm-hmm.
The breathing with the movements and the timing of it all, how that was such a mentally...
It's a practice of balance between mind, body, and breath.
But I guess that's not important either. I'm just saying to stay chronological. Like, you didn't just start doing yoga and say, oh, wow, this is great. It was
Right.
like yoga was a big strength thing in the beginning, because that's how it's always presented, too. Like, in the city, especially in Kansas City, you're not going to find a ton of super zen...
I mean, you can, but you got to be like, you got to
If you
look
go to
for it.
yoga studios, but I mean, a lot of the yoga classes I was taking were at gyms and stuff.
Oh, that's right. We did do a lot of yoga at Health Ridge
Yeah,
for a while.
and that was great and huge for our climbing, our physical climbing practice. But it wasn't until we learned that yoga was hugely helpful in that area, then started branching out deeper into better, not necessarily better, but different styles of yoga. Our friends' yoga classes, and that incorporated more of the mind into the body practice. And then it's like, oh, whoa, there is something here. Because then following that, we kind of got into a practice of hanging out and stretching with our friends.
As funny as that sounds.
Yeah, but I mean, it just was awesome. It was a new group of friends who everybody was super chill, and we were all kind of in the same place of trying to find people who would do fun adventures and talk about deep things, just explore life together. So we found that stretching was a really awesome way to spend time together. You especially.
Yeah. And
Because
honestly,
you'd never really stretched before.
no, I hadn't. And that's something that I had, yeah, any time that I would stretch, it was kind of like I felt like I should be doing something else, like this isn't useful enough. So something that helped me was either listening to podcasts while I stretched, and then that evolved into reading too. So while I'm like sitting in a stretch or while I'm stretching, I'll also be reading, because reading back then had the same sort of issue in my mind, to where whenever I was reading, if my mind would wander off the subject, then I would feel like I was wasting time and I should be doing something else. So if I combined reading with stretching, then anytime my mind wandered, it's like, whatever, I'm still stretching.
That's interesting, because that's kind of the same thought as the mental, physical connection of yoga. Because I think of stretching and I think of soccer practice, and stretching is kind of a pain to do.
And it was just so redundant.
Right, but then when you add reading or any other mental practice, or think of it in more than just a physical sense.
And to be honest, Kratom really helped me with stretching and reading, just to slow down and like get into my body and feel the different pain points in my body and be able to zone into those and then stretch them out directly. Because it's not, when I stretch now, it's not that I'm just going through the motions. I'll sit with myself and zone into different parts of my body and figure out where's tight or where feels hot, and then find a stretch that targets that specific point. Up until that point where I would like slow down and stretch, I would just like, okay, this stretch is good for me. I'll touch my toes. Now I'll stretch out my hamstrings. Now I'll, but through yoga and through climbing and these different sort of mindfulness practices, I realized that I can stretch whatever I need to directly, especially like my hips and groins.
It's interesting too, your hips hold a lot of your stress.
Yeah.
So in stretching those out, the rest of your mind can then clear up and you can get deeper into other areas that beyond stretching.
And it's wild how those two are bound together. Like sometimes if I'm sitting in a really uncomfortable stretch that's like getting at like a deep root in my hips that is like uncomfortable to stretch out, my mind will go to places that's like things will bubble up that are like, what? Where did that come from? And it's almost like the pairing between mind and body is like super prevalent in that.
One of my favorite practices for calming down my pretty crazy mind has been journaling. I've been journaling for several years, more consistently in the last few years as we've been traveling. But you're just constantly thinking, and to then have to sit and select the words that you're going to put on paper, it really does a number on what you're thinking about it. You're not only thinking about it, but then you're actively writing it. You're kind of reading as you're writing, and it takes all these big, complex thoughts, really simplifies them, and it really makes you slow down and think about what you're writing, because you only write the important things. So that was a huge practice it was kind of in the beginning, it was a lot of just venting, trying to make sense of what my thoughts were and why I was thinking the way that I was. And as I got a lot better and more practiced at journaling, and as it became a routine, it kind of started evolving more into a tracking thing and like a memories log. Now I don't really need to use it so much to help me process, but in the beginning I would say that was the most helpful form of mindfulness, and I didn't even realize that that's what I was doing.
You were in like a far more emotionally flux state back then too, right?
Oh yeah.
And I think journaling like helped you get to like be able to slow down and like defragment your mind, right?
Yeah, because I mean, there was just so much going on with friends and with work and with us and with our new dog that we'd probably gotten around that time.
And our tegu.
Yeah, we just had so much going on. So when I could sit by myself, like the very few times, at that time it was like a few times a week, I would just give myself the space to step away from everything and sit with my journal and try to process everything. And as that became routine, then along with all the other elements of life that we've been practicing and going through, that it was, I don't know what I'm trying to say there, but
Elsa's journaling habits really inspired me, because whenever we would talk about like, oh, what were we doing 6 months ago, or what were we doing like around this date, or what happened, Elsa could flip back into her journal and tell us like where we were at, what was going on, like who had visited recently, all those different things. And I thought that was so cool. And on the Tim Ferriss podcast, I've listened to him for a long time, and he has a lot of just mega awesome people on his podcast. And two of the most prevalent patterns between all the awesome people that he had on were journaling and meditation. So eventually, through Elsa's inspiration and through hearing that over and over again, I was like, there's got to be something to this. Like everybody from Benjamin Franklin, Nikola Tesla, Bruce Lee, all these awesome people kept journals.
and I mean, you hear that and you think it's just like Dear Diary.
Right.
But it's so much, you can make it exactly what you need.
And sometimes I do need that. Like sometimes if you and I are going through something or whatever, sometimes I will just write down like what I'm feeling and what the problem is and what's going on. And then once I do that though, I can like articulate my thoughts to myself, and then I can put them to rest. Like I don't have to keep that background process churning in my mind.
Another thing a lot of people do is brain dump journaling, where you write down anything that comes to your mind as soon as it comes to your mind, and do like a page of that. And that helps. I don't know what it helps. You've done that?
Yeah, that's like where some of my blog posts have come from. Just if I'm if I'm like stewing on a problem or a certain set of thoughts and I just can't figure out how to get away from them, then, and honestly for me, it's faster for me to type if I'm going to do like a sort of
Brain
mind
dump.
bomb it. Yeah.
I guess that the benefit in that would be to see all the different thoughts that you've got,
Right.
because there's no order. Whereas I like to journal to kind of make a story of it, like have a start and have an end to each post in a way. But the brain dump, then, I mean, yes, you could get more brain dumped out typing, but that's the point of journaling.
Is to slow down.
Right.
But I think both have their own, like they're both useful, but they're different.
Right,
you know,
for sure.
Like sometimes, if I'm just like spun up on ideas and I just need to get them down, then since I'm faster at typing, I'll choose that route.
Do you do that in the Notes app?
I use Bear. It's a writing app. It's excellent if you're looking for an app to use on. It's on Mac, iPad, iPhone. I don't know if it's on PC yet or not, but it's excellent. It's just a simple notes app. But if I were quicker at writing, then that would be how I would do that, right?
Yeah, and I think most people would probably start by doing the digital way, because everybody's always got their phones or devices on them, so to quickly, like, bleh, on a keyboard would probably be a better way to start. But I'm trying to illustrate the merit in taking a pen and putting that down on paper.
I think that's ultra important, and I'm glad that I like have adopted that practice, because at first my handwriting's still crap. Like it's not, it's hardly legible. But if you look at my first journals versus my most recent, my handwriting's far more legible, and I don't think that's just because my handwriting got better. I think it's because I have more agency in my thoughts. So it's not like my mind is like
scribbling, scrambling
right,
to scribble.
Right. It's more of, okay, like I have time to write this and I can write whatever I'm thinking. Versus like, okay, and like trying to keep up with my brain and like where its zany process is going.
One of my favorite ways lately to get into a very mindful place is to drink cacao and sit outside in the sun first thing in the morning. I like that time because that's when Baron's asleep. It's kind of like my me time. And Baron gets his me time at night when I go to sleep a little earlier. It's a little bit different when it's warmer out. We kind of have more aligned sleep schedules, but
it was especially variable when we were using the wood stove, because I would stay up really late and Elsa would get up really early to keep the stove going.
That was specifically the me time. I didn't even, this is coming up only now in my head, but in the city I never really gave myself much time to myself. I didn't realize how much of an introvert I was until we started doing this, because now when I go hang out with, doing this meaning living in a scamp, because now we'll go in and see people, see friends and stuff, and go back to the scamp and I'll just be like, holy cow, more drained than, I don't know, than I ever would have realized in the city, because I was so constantly going and doing that all the time. I never really knew that I needed to give myself that kind of self-care and time. Everybody talks about how important that is, but you kind of just brush it off and say, I'll do it later, I'll do it tomorrow. But that is drinking cacao, sitting by myself, just thinking. Or not thinking. Doing whatever I want with myself in the morning has been a huge practice of growth for me. Helps me recharge.
Something that, so recently, we've been moving around a lot and doing all these different things, and I've been having trouble figuring out, like where to channel my energy. So I went back and read my old journals, and I think some of the times that I was the most like on point and usefully productive was when we were in Arizona, and those were the times when every morning it was super nice outside. So, and it was hot enough to where like I couldn't sleep in. So I would wake up every morning and stretch and meditate and journal. And at that point I had held myself to journaling every day. And now in the last like 4 days, I've been holding myself to that again, to like every day I have to journal, because I'd kind of fallen out of practice with all the different things that we were doing.
So that's kind of your way of giving yourself you time.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that you taught me through your you time is going on walks. Anytime Barron has a lot on his mind or is upset or just has a lot of energy to kind of push away, just like you would with climbing, you'll go on walks. It just sets your mental order back in check. And I learned through you that that is a really helpful way too to gather myself.
Even when we were, or especially when we were living in the city, in any new place that we go with the scamp, I'll always find a little trail to walk and just like lap.
I think that'd be a good thing to do for anybody starting a new job or starting, I mean, that's not really easy to say. But as you're trying to get to know somebody, or if you're having a conflict with somebody, going on a walk with that other person, just like it helps you clear your mind, it's an interesting way to...
It's an interesting way to pace, right? Because you have like the physical pacing where you're walking at the same pace together, and then that sort of makes a mental bridge. So then you're like kind of on the same pace together. I hadn't really thought about that, but I think that there's truth in it. What are you looking at?
People walking by, they might be the scampers.
Because they're looking at us so hard?
Yeah.
That's funny if they listen to the podcast. They're like, oh, that was us.
A scamp drove by a little while ago and they had a white Forester and a little 13-foot scamp, but everything just looks nicer and newer.
Yeah, like their whole setup was a good 10 or 15 years newer than ours.
Where were we at? I don't know exactly why I said that about the going on a walk with somebody else, but...
It's super useful.
It is, because it's so useful for not only yourself, it would just be a much more productive way for people to get things going together, get ideas started together, to go on walks together, because it's so cleansing of your own solo mind that, like, when we go on walks together, we come up with so many ideas and come back so inspired every time. I mean, especially
or just
if we...
decompressed. You know, if we go on a walk together when we are agitated or whatever, then by the time we get back, it's like, okay, we figured it out.
Or if we're agitated and we go on walks separately.
Yeah, that's super
a nice
useful
thing
too.
to do.
Another activity that has helped me in my mindfulness journey, if you will, is slacklining, because it brings you into that exact moment. If you're not familiar, slacklining it's a piece of webbing that's about, the one that I use is about 2 inches wide, and you strap it between two trees, so it's like you're tightrope walking, but not super high off the ground. When I'm slacklining, I can't be really thinking about anything except for that exact moment, otherwise I'll fall off the line. So when I was doing like programming work, or when I was doing design work with Alec, or any of the like high cognitive load work, and I couldn't solve a problem, I had a slackline set up in our backyard, so anytime I needed to, I would go get on the slackline and put my conscious mind on that exact moment on the slackline, and then once I stepped back into my work, my subconscious had then oftentimes solved the problem.
They say that sleep does the same thing. Your subconscious mind processes so much for you, and if you're really struggling to finish something or to get a new look at something, stepping away and coming back usually does the trick. Right?
Totally. That's like why walks are so useful, like we were talking.
With video editing, I do that every 30 minutes at least. Even if it's not getting up and going on a walk, just stopping, editing, because then you can come back, you're not even thinking about the project anymore, but it's still churning in your subconscious mind. How does that work?
I don't know. It's like our frontal lobe is the very human part of our mental. So if we can put that on something else, then there's the whole rest of the brain that can chew on the problem.
It's kind of like when I play solitaire.
Exactly,
as I'm doing other things, occupying one part of my brain so that the other part of my brain can do other stuff. it seems like such an easy solution to accomplishing tasks is to step away and channel your brain elsewhere. But we'd never allow ourselves to do that. It's like the constant, no, you have to continue grinding, grinding, grinding. And then by that point, you're just so drained that you have nothing left.
So you can't make any progress on the problem. My issue is that I'll often procrastinate to the last moment. So then I have to grind at it.
Well, pressure, I do really well under pressure like that too.
Totally. Okay, so we've talked about journaling and climbing and all these different things. To help myself get into journaling, first I got a small moleskin journal that was lined, so that in it being small, that was intentional, because then I held myself to a page a day. So in the morning, even if I wasn't going to journal right then, I would just write the date at the top, and then I had already gotten the ball rolling, so I had like some level of momentum. And in the journal being small, it's not that I had to stop on that exact page once I finished. I could continue on to the next page, but I had to at least finish that small page of the journal every day. And that helped me get into a flow of it, and then also that would work into other things that I would write about. So it's not like I didn't have an exact thing that I had to write about each day. It was just whatever I chose. So it could be emotions, it could be thoughts, it could be what I'm working on, it could be experiences, anything in the world. Like, I gave myself that absolute creative freedom, and in that I would oftentimes work into blog posts and things without actually even trying. And how that works in my mind is it's like opening, and all these different practices are sort of, they all do this, but journaling especially, because my mind is always running on new thoughts. It's like opening the task manager or activity monitor on your computer and just turning off all the idle tasks. And when you do that and you spin up a new task, you have all of that processing power to allocate to whatever task you're opening up. So by putting these idle thoughts to bed by journaling, then I could open up new space and have the cognitive power to dump into whatever problem that I chose.
That sounds a little bit like our question of how it works to when your subconscious mind processes things.
Mm-hmm.
By shutting out all the other processes, then you can channel all of that energy into that one direct process. Meditation is meditation is probably the mindfulness practice.
Yeah.
But it's interesting how many types of meditation there are. I've started using pretty routinely Sam Harris's meditation app.
Waking up?
Is that what it's? Yeah, Waking Up with Sam Harris. And that's about 10 to 15 minutes. Different sessions. There's 50 sessions that you go through. And it's not so much a practice of stopping your thoughts. I think that's where everybody gets caught up is, oh, I have to sit here and meditate. Oh, crap, I had a thought. I lose. All right, I give up. But who is it that said...
I think it was Tim Ferriss or somebody on his podcast. But it's the practice of bringing the mind back to focus. So if your meditation practice that you're on in that instance is like your breath, and you're just counting your breaths, for example, or being mindful of your breath and just feeling your breath, once your mind starts to wander and go off on whatever tangent it goes on, once you catch that and bring it back to the breath, like, if you will, that's how you collect your points. Right?
I like Sam Harris because he, especially in the beginning meditations, he makes you notice, he guides you to notice the sounds and even the sights. Sometimes he'll have you meditate with your eyes open, have you notice everything, then give you some time to sit and continue noticing. Then he'll come back and say, oh, you may have wandered off in thought.
And you're like, how'd you know, Sam?
Right, exactly. But then, yeah, like you said, that's when you win, is bringing your thoughts back. Because if you can get into the habit and the routine of that, of, oh, I'm in my everyday life. I'm sitting here and,
So an example is if I'm writing and I catch my mind just wandering on to what I'm going to eat, or looking at chips and thinking about how good chips are going to taste, the same mechanism applies. So then I can bring my mind back to the writing, and it's not that like, oh, now you're in trouble because you're thinking about chips. It's that mechanism of bringing back to focus that you're trying to train.
because then you can learn how to stay in the present moment,
Yes,
which is a good thing.
agreed.
And that's what it is it is training. Did you say
It's
training?
practice, yeah.
But it's training too. You're training through sitting and taking those 10 minutes to do the meditation courses. You are training your brain to be able to do that when you're not sitting and meditating. There's been so many times where I have started thinking negative thoughts about a conflict or something that had happened prior to that situation that I'm in. And because I've been training every morning, or most mornings, through this meditation practice, I can then channel those thoughts away so much easier than if I had no meditation practice at all. So the meditation practice itself, it's like that isn't necessarily what is making me more mindful. That's the training. And then it's integrating that into my everyday average life that is where the work comes in. Would you agree?
Yeah, that was really well said. And I think it's important too to characterize these things as a practice. So even climbing and writing and meditation and yoga, all of these things are practices. So it's not like if you're in a yoga class, it's a practice with you. It's not at all a competition. If you make it that, like, you're welcome to make it that, and it may push you harder, but remember that it's a practice with yourself. And it's not, like, the point of it isn't to just, like, be good at it. It's to practice and apply that practice into different facets of your life.
So back to that rocket analogy.
Yeah.
It seems like had we had all of these mindfulness practices when we were strapped to our rockets, we would have been a lot more guided. And it just feels like you have to. Like, how did we do all of that without having this type of pause and clarity? How could we have, I mean, it just makes me think that I could have accomplished a lot more of the things that I was trying to do, finished a lot more projects with a lot more sound creativity.
And they probably would have been a lot more useful projects, too.
If I had given myself the space and the time to do those things. But I just didn't know. I was just racing to complete. But then the completion of my projects was kind of half-assed because I guess I maybe wasn't fully dedicating myself. Because I don't know, I just didn't realize I needed to give myself the time.
It's like you gotta slow down to speed up. Like, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So if you're, the rocket analogy applies. If you're just flying at Mach 1 into outer space, and you haven't chosen your heading directly, or you haven't even chosen a target to go to, then you will just continue into outer space. But at some points, it's important to even stop the rocket and use your little pneumatic systems to point directly where you need to go, and then you can juice the fuel. But without taking time to slow down, then you just end up running and flying forever, you know?
Another thought is, now that we're on our luxurious sailboat...
Yeah. I don't know if have we even talked about that metaphor yet?
You did in the beginning.
Okay.
We're gliding along. We're much slower now.
Well, because when we were in the city, it was like we're on a rocket. Now we're more of a boat with the scamp life.
But it's not that our mindfulness practices have taken us from a rocket to a boat.
No, like we could apply them to the rocket as well.
Right. We switched from the rocket life to the boat life in the scamp. And so then I asked Baron earlier, so then if we already are slow, why do we need mindfulness practices?
And the answer.
And what is...
It's not an answer. But if we did slow down and we were just kind of meandering through the forest in our little scamp, and we didn't have any direction whatsoever, we didn't take time to choose direction.
We'd just be bonking around.
Yeah, we'd just be castaway, like with our little volleyball, doing nothing. And we would be at the whim of the wind and the current, right?
Which is a nice way to be.
Yeah. And
But
I think once I'm older and like in grandpa mode, I'm excited to just bonk around in the ocean.
and now that we have this slow time with all of these mindfulness practices, we can fully and completely dedicate our energy into exactly what we want instead of wasting our time. Like, I used to spend a lot of time working so that I could have money to pay for rent. Now that that process is gone, I spend my energy learning new things, creating new crafts. I've made a lot of stuff since we've lived in the scamp. We learn a lot of different tech things. We've downloaded masterclass. We're just constantly learning because we have that time. And I think if we didn't have these mindfulness practices, we would feel a little bit lost. It would,
Well,
I
and I
mean,
do sometimes feel discombobulated and lost when I'm not taking time to articulate my thoughts to myself and figure out where it is that we're going. Like, there have been times where we don't have a rudder or a sail and we're just bonking around trying to figure out what in the world is going on.
yeah, that is true. It is just like our city lives, except this is much slower.
Yeah. And we don't have to keep dumping fuel in, you know, in the form of money. Like, we need less money so we can just like take the time to have personal solace.
But then because we require less money, we can get caught up in almost even laziness. Well, I get caught up too much in my phone,
Yeah.
social media and stuff, and then it's like, oh my god, I just wasted like 30 minutes just scrolling. So these days, like we have right now, right this very second, we have no Wi-Fi. We just happen to park in a spot that doesn't have any service, and it's like everything is coming back so full force because we're spending all of our energy with very clear intent.
Yeah, and I think it's important too. Like, I personally can't be, and I've been observing this the last few days, I can't be clicking on all cylinders all the time. Like, I'll have waves of inspiration and waves where I just need to, like, decompress and watch YouTube videos or whatever, you know? But I need to not lean as much into that, like, procrastination mechanism or that mental distraction and, like, catch myself in that. And I'm getting better and better at it. But sometimes I do just need to like decompress and do nothing. And I think we all do, and that's okay. But doing like useful things like going on a walk or just meditating or writing.
It's a much more useful type of pause
Right.
than escaping through non-productive forms of
Right.
escape.
But even that being said, sometimes escape is the best medicine.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a practice of being able to step back into the clicking on all cylinders mode once I've had enough pause. So to clear up the sailboat analogy, right? Without mindfulness practices, it's like you're just bonking around on a wooden boat without any agency over the direction that you're going. With mindfulness practices, one, you can choose your destination. You can then use the different practices, whether it be journaling or just meditation, whatever it is, to then articulate your thoughts to yourself and like make headway toward whatever that destination is. And you can use the sail and the rudder to like affect that. But without taking the time to think and without taking the time to establish intent, you can also often find yourself just bonking around in the ocean without any agency over where you're going. Thank you for listening to this episode. For more information and links to the things we talked about, check out our show notes at nomad.com/podcast. If you want to see more of what we're up to, we've documented our travels on YouTube for the past 3 years and are up to 250,000 subscribers. Check it out at youtube.com/elsaray. Please give us a 5-star review if you like the show so other people can find it. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.